So far, we've been using functions that are provided by Python. So we used the print function, the input function, int, float, and in earlier videos, we learned now how to create our own functions. Now, Python has a lot of built-in functions, not just the ones we used, and sometimes you might need to import something to get some functionality. So when you start up new, or you start up like the Python interpreter on using any IDE, some things are already like kind of so basic that are provided immediately. But some functions are not so basic, and so if you want to use them, you have to import them. You have to kind of ask Python to bring them in for you and load them in for you. So importing a module does take some overhead, so that's why they're not added for you automatically. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about one of those modules, or a couple of those modules. One of them is the random module. And the random module is a module that provides some functions to help us generate random numbers. So for example, here I took a snippet from the documentation from the web, but here I'm going to explain a couple for you. So here, if I have the random module imported, and I want to generate a number, a random number from 1 to 10, I would call the randint function. Now this is a typo, it should be rand lowercase I. If I want to generate a random number and I want 10 values for it, here what I can do, there's another one that's called randrange, and you give it a number and it generates a random number from 0 up to that number -1 inclusive. Now these are very similar. You can use either one. There is another one like randrange, which is similar, but here it's similar to randint, but you give it like 5, like and 10, and it's going to generate like numbers from 5 to 10, for example. So like I said, you can see that randint and randrange are kind of very similar. And randrange is nice in that it also gives you the flexibility to go in increments. So here I want to generate a random number from 0, this should say 0, to 100. So here it doesn't include the 100, and I want to go in increments of 10. So it's going to go 0, 9, and so on. So let's actually try these different ones. So how do I use them? Well, the first thing I want to do is I need to import module random. So I'm going to go to my new, and I'm going to say import random. Okay, and now I want to generate some random numbers. So let's write a function. Generate random. And what we're going to do is we're going to generate a random number. So say random, that's the name of my module. And I'm going to say randint. And I want you to generate a random int for me that's between 1 and 6. Let's say it's a dice game. And let's say dice equal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say print me dice. And I want to do this like 10 times to see the different random numbers. So I'm going to say actually we didn't learn, sorry, we didn't learn that part. So I want to do it several times. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this code multiple times. I did it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm generating 5 random numbers. I'm going to go to my main, and let me just comment this code out. And in my main, I'm going to tell it to generate random. Let's see what's going to happen. It generated random numbers between 1 and 6, and here we see that, you know, I didn't get any 4 and I didn't get any 6. Let's run it again and see some other random numbers. Now we're getting some other random numbers, and every time I run it, I'm going to get different random numbers. And here I got a 6. So I know that this will generate random numbers between 1 and 6. Okay, so this generates random numbers between 1 and 6 inclusive, including 1 and 6. Okay, let's write another one. Generate random 2. And now what I want to do is I want to use rand range. And here, what I want to do the same thing. So I want to generate a value that's possible, that has 6 possible values. But the problem with rand range is that it gives me back a number starting with 0, and I don't want that. So I don't want it to be able, I don't want 0, because 0 is not a valid value for a dice game, right? So whatever it gives me, I'm going to add 1 to it, because rand range gives a value from 0 to 5. It doesn't include the 6, okay? It's not going to include the 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of shift it over so that instead of 0, it's starting with 1. And we want to test it. So we're going to test it several times just to make sure that it's working. Okay. And let's comment this line out now and call generate random 2. We should get numbers between 1 and 6 also. So we get the 1, we get the 2, the 3, we didn't get the 4 or 5, we got the 6. We'll just run it a couple times to make sure we don't have any issues. And so it's generating good numbers. So we know that's going to work, okay? If I made a mistake and I didn't put here the +1, I might get a 0. So that's the rand range. Now, you could also use rand range where you give it a starting and an ending, but it doesn't include the end. So here, if I was to define generate random 3, and this one is going to be exactly the same. So let me just copy all this code. Except I want to say my starting and my ending. So I want to say start with 1, end with 6. And let's just copy this part here. And I'm going to show you that here we're never going to get the 6 generated. We're going to try several times and we're not going to get the 6 generated. Why? Because this version of rand range doesn't include the end. The 6 is not included. So let's call generate random 3. So here we got up to 5. And if we run it many times, we're never going to get the 6. See, we're never getting the 6. Why are we not getting the 6? Because here, rand range doesn't include the last number. So this is the difference between rand range and rand int. Okay, so rand range doesn't include the end. So if I wanted to generate dice, I have to end with 7. So let's try that. 7 in there. And let's run it now and see that we're going to start getting 6s eventually. We got a 6 now. Okay, so this is how the rand range with the starting and ending it doesn't include, so the end is not included. So it gives back from 1 inclusive to 7 include the 7. Okay, now the last version of rand range, let's use it here. Def random 4. The last version of this, and this one is not really used for dice, so let's just say even number. Okay, so let's say I want to generate an even number. And I want it to be from 2 up to 8, okay, and I want it in increments of 2. Okay. Here, this will generate a random number from 2 inclusive to 8 exclusive. It's not going to include 8 in increments of 2. And let's run it many times to see that we're never going to get that 8. So the only possible values here are 2, 4, and 6. So let's print num. And let's copy this code again. And let's print and copy. And finally, let's just print the last value. And we want to call generate random 4. So let's call 4. Okay, and so we're going to get numbers from 2 up to 7, but only the evens. And so we get 2, 4, 6. And if we keep running it, we're getting 2s and 4s, 2s and 4s, 2s and 4s, 2s and 4s, 2, 4, 2 and 6, 2, 4, 6. We're never getting the 8. What if I do want the 8? Well, if you want the 8, then you just add one more. Okay, so range doesn't, the second number that you give it is not included. Okay, kind of like that stopping point, but it's not included in the range. So that's the difference between rand range and rand int. So now I'm starting to get the 8 when I updated my range to say end at 9. So this is the difference, like I said, between rand int and rand range. Rand int, you just give it the range, and it will give you exactly from that starting to that ending, including both end points. Rand range has different variations where you can give it just a range, like how many values you want, different values, or you want like a starting point and an ending point, or you can say starting point, ending point. So this should be 1. Starting point, ending point, and increments. Okay, so this is all for whole numbers. Well, what if I wanted to generate random numbers that are decimals? So like I want like a percent, for example, between 0 and 1, or a uniform random distribution. Random is a function inside the random module that generates a number between 0 and 1. Now, if you want this decimal number to not just be between 0 and 1, you can use uniform 0 and then a decimal number. So, sorry, and a whole number. So let's try both of these also. So let's define random. Let's call it float. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to print it immediately so I don't have to create a variable. So I'm going to go to random and I'm going to say I want you to generate a random number for me. And I'm going to do that. Okay. And let's call generate random float. We should get many, many random numbers between 0 and 1. So here we have those numbers between 0 and 1, and if we generate, we'll just keep getting decimal numbers between 0 and 1. So that's the generate random float. Now let's say I wanted to generate a random number that's a float, but I want it to be between 0 and 10. In that case, what I would do is I would call the uniform, the method function, sorry. So uniform, you give it the range, let's say 0 and 10, or I can even say 5 and 10, and it will generate random numbers always between 5 and 10. And let's run it a couple times. So now I'm getting random numbers between 5 and 10, 5 point something, 6 point something, 7 point something, and so on. Okay, so this is how you can generate float decimals that are random numbers that are floats. Now, sometimes when you're doing some kind of code, you want to generate the same random numbers over and over. You don't want it to be really, really random, but you want the random numbers to be kind of the same so that, you know, maybe you have a test that you're doing and you want all the people taking the test to have the same random questions. For some reason. So the way the random number generator works is that it depends on the system clock. So there's always a starting point where you pick your first random number from. And so most random generators, what they do is they go to the system clock and get what the time is down to the millisecond. And they use that to generate their first random number. And then they have an algorithm that they follow how to generate the next random number. So take that, multiply it by 2, divide by 8, add 64, and then, do whatever. So if you want to always generate the same random numbers, what you want to do is you want to say, instead of using the system clock as your initial value when you're generating the random number, you want to tell Python, I want you to start with a certain value. And so what you do is you call a method called the seed method. And what the seed method does, it starts off the random with this value, not the value that's displayed as a random, but the value that it does the calculation on. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to call random. And this one here is going to be hard seeing those floats. Well, let's try. Maybe we'll be able to see it. I'm going to say random.seed, and I'm just going to say, let's say 10. Okay. So now I got those values. So let's look at them. 7.851489. So let's just concentrate on the first three. So 7.85.14.89. And let's run it again. And I'm getting the same thing, 7.851489. And no matter how many times I run it, I will always get the same random numbers. Why? Because I told it I want you to start yourself off with this 10 instead of the system clock. If I change this number, let's say to 107, I will start getting different random numbers. So now it's 6.23, the first number, and if we keep running it, we're going to keep getting the same numbers over and over and over again. So this, yes, I am generating random numbers, but I want my random numbers to always follow the same pattern. So that's what you do, is you use the random.seed function. Okay. So let's just look at these and kind of practice what's going to happen. If I wanted to mimic throwing a dice, what should I do? So we saw that we can use random.randint, and here it should be lowercase I. We also saw that we can use randrange, right? Now, what if I wanted to generate random even integers from 10 to 50? What should I use? So we talked that we can use randrange. You give it the starting number, you give it one more than the ending number, and then you say a 2 for going in increments of 2. Now, what if I wanted to always generate the same random sequence of integers in the range 30 to 80? Well, if it's always the same random sequence, I need to make sure that I start out seed with some value, and it doesn't matter what this value is. And then I will call randint, and this should be a lowercase I, with 30 to 80. Okay. And here, because I'm using randint, it's okay to use 80. If I used randrange, I would have had to use 81. And now if I wanted to generate a random dollar amount from 1 to 100, again, I can just use uniform, because here I'm talking about a dollar amount, and dollar amounts, like money, can have decimals. So in that case, I would use the uniform function.